Hey, salespreneurs. As always, I'm on a mission to find and connect you with salespeople turned entrepreneurs. Today, we're meeting up with the one and only Tom Alaimo, aka Tommy Tahoe, from the Millennial Sales Podcast. He also is the founder of TA Sales, recently launched an online community. Tom is always involved with the online sales community on LinkedIn, always giving back. And so just super excited to get to share some time with him and let you guys get to know him as well. So Tom, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, man. I'm stoked to be here. I got my cold brew lined up, and it's Friday afternoon, just ready to have a good chat with you, man. So I'm excited to talk about, the salespreneur is just such a fun angle. And we were just saying this before we recorded that so many sellers have this kind of intrinsic desire to want to build a business or curious about it. And that's what makes them good at sales. And so hopefully we can clear some paths up and, help people get to that next step if that's what they're trying to get to.
Absolutely. And it's so fun because I feel like you've had a very entrepreneurial journey. Obviously, if you look at your LinkedIn, it looks like a very traditional corporate path, but you've also just been constantly involved in these online sales communities and trying to find different ways to create value online. And so I'm curious just to hear about that journey from, what got you started in sales, and then why have you started to lean more into this entrepreneurial path of giving back and trying to provide value back to the sales community. That being said, Tom, what really has gotten you into this entrepreneurship side of things?
Yeah, so I come from a family of my grandfather is an entrepreneur. He was actually in sales. He was an SVP of sales, and he's probably in his 30s, and had 3 kids and fancy house and all this stuff, and decided to remortgage the house and bet it all on buying a business. And for some reason, my grandmother allowed him to do that, and then that became our family business that he ran for about 40 years, profitable every year. And now he's retired, and my dad and uncle and aunt run it, and it's just been a small family business for a long time. And so that's just always been in the back of my mind. I didn't want to necessarily do a family business, but I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. So, when reading about, great business people, a lot of them suggested there's 2 things you want to get really good at. One is leadership and one is sales. And so it just kind of started me on that sales path, and we could talk about the ins and outs, but I've always been looking for that angle. I was in sales for about 10 years. I was creating content online for about 8 of those years, mostly for free. The 98% of it, was I didn't make a dime off of, but it was just in trying to build up to find an opportunity to create a business. I didn't know exactly what the product would be or the service would be, but I knew that if I got good at sales, and then if I got good at just the content side and feeling it out, that some sort of opportunity would present itself. And it took, a while, but it showed itself. And then I kind of have been jumping on it and trying to create, more and more things from there. So yeah, I think it's just something that's been inside of me for a long time. I started a sports magazine in middle school, and me and my buddies would be selling it door to door. And so it's just one of those things that I just find really exciting.
I know you sold, sold Cutco knives for a while. And I feel like that's a very entrepreneurial thing because you're 1099, right? You have to go and hustle, and it's a very different sales cycle, but it's a great place to cut your teeth on it. And then also, even from what you've been doing with building content over the last 10 years, really refining the craft there. I know one question you've asked on your podcast a lot of times, so I'm curious just to hear your side of it, is you'll ask people how they made their first dollar online. You said 98% of what you were doing online, you weren't making any money. When was the first time that you actually made money from something you did online?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, I started creating content in 2016. So that's when I started my podcast and blog. It was really broad. It was about personal development, and then I niched it down to sales over time. But I was doing that weekly for many years, hundreds of episodes, social media content, all of that. The first time that was all kind of leading to building up an audience. And I wrote an ebook in 2020. So about 4 to 5 years in, I wrote the ebook that was how to thrive in your first year of sales, I think it was called. And I just put it up on Gumroad, and I saw other people. LinkedIn was becoming more of a thing. and like the Justin Welches of the world and Scott Leases of the world, kind of the OGs, were starting to put out like products. And so I just figured I would throw one out there. I donated half the money to charity. It was a weird time, in 2020. And, I didn't, I thought I was going to make like a bunch of money, and I ended up selling not that many. I probably made like a couple $100 and donated half the charity. So not even enough for, a partial rent payment for where I was living in San Francisco. But there is like a light switch that kind of flips in your head of like, I just turned nothing into something, and then that something led to money in my pocket. Rather than I need to get employed by a company, I need to learn the product, I've got to demo it, I've got to follow their rules, I've got to stick to my territory, and I can sell and I can close and I can make good money. But just the idea that, I could come up with something from thin air and do that was like mind blowing to me. And it was less about like the couple $100 and more about like, what could that be in the future?
Well, one thing I'm curious about as well is that, okay, the first thing you sold online, it's an ebook about sales. Now, it feels like everyone on LinkedIn that has 30,000 followers or more is creating some sort of online community, selling a course, anything like that. And now that you've had a couple of years to kind of refine that, what do you feel like you're doing that's separating yourself so that you can actually provide that value versus just being like another person that's selling an online course?
Yeah, I think it's, there's something about just like getting started. And yeah, there's a lot of people that do it. And if you're just getting started, it's a good way to start because, there's always someone behind you in the path that could learn from you. If you're in your first sales job, there's people that are interviewing for that job, right? If you're, you just got promoted to manager, there's plenty of people that wish that they could be a manager. So you could kind of show them the path, and like there's a way to help people that way. I think the differentiator is if you're doing it to just get a product out the door for your first time, that's cool. But the way to really hit is to really, really understand the market and what people want and where there's a hole, and to try to fill that. So like, for example, everyone and their mother has a on-demand video course. A lot of it is about prospecting or discovery, because those are two of the most common topics and most important topics in sales. So anywhere you can go, you can get a $100 to $3 on-demand video course, 12-page ebook, something like that. So, the first product that I launched when I started doing TA sales was a prospecting boot camp. It's very hands-on. I've had almost 1,000 people come through. It's 5 weeks. There's 10 coaching calls. There's 5 or 6 guest speakers. There's a Slack channel. I'm putting a ton of effort into it. I'm DMing people. I'm getting on one-on-one calls. Like I'm providing like a white glove service in a space where most people are just like taking an hour, making a couple videos and trying to sell that. What I'm doing with the community is more focused on, or it's really focused on like mental health and people's relationships and the things outside of sales tactics that will help them actually do more in sales. I call it the inner game of sales, where it's like, it's not just about what your cold email says, but how are you handling your own self on a day-to-day basis that actually helps you perform better and do so in a community, in a tribe, and try to improve that way. So I think the difference there is like, I've talked to hundreds or thousands of salespeople. They tell me this is a problem. And then if I try to think of a way to help kind of solve that, versus my first ebook was just like, let me just try to think of something that I could throw out there and see if I can make some money. And I think there's a huge difference for that.
I love that point. And that's something I'd love to point out to people that are listening as well. Because I had another guy on the podcast a few weeks ago who his first business that he actually acquired it failed like massively. He spent $100,000 and it basically failed. But then he had to start another business and it's doing really well now. But it's because this time he's very focused on the solution that he's presenting. And so I think it's cool that you're able to touch on that. Is I'm not just trying to create something that I think my audience will like. I've actually talked to and sat down with over 1,000 sales reps, figured out, hey, this is the hardest part of their job, is trying to find more pipeline. So being able to create a prospecting boot camp around that is just hitting like the gap that needs to be there. And that's why it's worth transacting money and providing compensation for your services, because it's actually solving a problem for me. And so what all does TA sales encompass? I know you've like touched on a few things, but like just from a high level, what is TA sales?
Yep. So the mission of the company is to positively impact salespeople every day. So there's 3 products. One is the prospecting bootcamp that I just mentioned. The second is that we do team trainings. So we'll bring that, a lot of the prospecting type content, to teams. We'll do private workshops, sales kickoffs, things like that. And then the third thing that I just launched a couple weeks ago is Kaizen Collective, which is the community. Kaizen is a Japanese word that means continuous improvement. So to me, that I interpret that as like, how do we get 1% better every day? And so, I saw some data over the last couple of months, that 2 data points that really stand out that maybe you've seen also is that, number one, of all the salespeople surveyed last year, 31% of them hit quota. So less than a third of people are doing like, what is the satisfactory mark of like, am I doing my job well in theory?
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw data this week, because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, that 70% of salespeople labeled themselves as having either fair or poor mental health. In 2020, that number was 42%. So in those 4 years, it's almost doubled. So 1/3 of people are hitting quota, and almost 3/4 of people are having mental health challenges. To me, that's where I'm trying to focus my time, is like, we've got a tactical avenue, and then we've got like a support system here for you. Let's find some sort of tribe, when we're all feeling isolated and working from home angle, and trying to support people in those 2 ways. So that's what the business looks like right now.
Okay, so how does that work? Like, let's say I want to be a part of your community. Do I pay like a monthly fee to be a part of the community, and then I can also join the boot camp, or how does that work?
Yeah. So if you want to join the community, essentially, you get a couple things. So we do weekly calls that are exclusive to the community, where either I'll run or I'll bring in guest speakers that are great sellers and sales leaders. One call is focused on, some sort of sales tactic, and one call is focused on more of like, this inner game, mindset, psychology, health type of thing. You also get access to all the boot camps for free. You get all of the on-demand content that we have. We're going to be doing some meetups. I think that we're going to be planning one for the Utah crew at some point, hopefully this summer. We're going to do a big retreat at the end of this year. And, it's really like that, the content is great. And I think the learning is a big piece of it. I think if you were to ask people, they probably find it just as impactful or even more impactful learning from other salespeople at different companies across the world, and being able to interact with them and see what's working and what's not. And just like feeling that sense of like, man, I'm part of a real team here, that not everyone, but a lot of people don't feel that necessarily at work right now. And so that's what people get with the community.
So what do you think is the issue with mental health and sales right now? Like, why do you think people are much less satisfied? I know there's a lot of economic factors which are really big, but do you think that there's something specific to salespeople that can be addressed or that can like help people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to it. So, I mean, obviously on the economic side, my background is in tech, and a lot of people that maybe listen to this are in tech. So there's no surprise that the last like 2 to 3 years has been really challenging, and one of the hardest in decades for a lot of salespeople, hence the 31% hitting quota. So it's not just that the job is harder though, right? It's actually that there's so much pressure, first of all, tied to that number. It's not infrequent that I hear salespeople say, if I don't hit my number this month, I'm let go. I don't hit my number this quarter, I'm let go, or I'm put on a PIP. I was just on a call earlier today where someone told me that. It's not uncommon for people to tie whether or not they're going to President's Club, to their general self-worth. So that's part of it. It's not uncommon for people that started a sales career in the last 4 years to have never worked in an office before. And so the only world that they know is making cold calls in their apartment with their 5 roommates and their dog, which is a pretty brutal environment to learn how to sell. and have no like team camaraderie or being able to learn from other people or just like connect with others in like on their team. And so what we get are a lot of people that feel lonely and isolated, that are making less money than they used to, that are feeling less, kind of like self-importance because they're not hitting their number. And their manager is having a hard time coaching them because now they don't have enough time to coach all their reps. So they're not getting the proper like coaching and training and support. So it's just kind of like it's a really tough angle. I don't have like an easy solution for people out there. But there's a lot of factors working against salespeople that is making things harder to not only like hit numbers and make money, but also just like feel a sense of ease and, feel comfortable in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a couple of those points resonate pretty well, that there's a lot of folks out there who have never been in a sales office. And so their whole sales career has been very lonely and high pressure. And then also the other fact that, yeah, if I miss my number and lose my job, that's not a very motivating. I guess it can work two ways for people, right? For some people, they might be like, I have to go all in and like work really hard. But for some people, it can be like, I just want to clam up because I don't know if it's going to work out, right? And so I can see both sides of that being really hard. And I don't know if anyone has a solution, but I do agree that when you have a sense of community, or you feel like there's other people that are going through this that are also trying to look 2 or 3 turns ahead and get ahead with like their mental clarity, that it can help build a lot of support. So I really like what you're doing there with community. I also think that just communities in general are becoming more valuable. I used to think that these online communities are just kind of like a little fake way. But I mean, I joined one last year where I was like, oh, wow, this is actually legit. Like, I love the value that I'm getting out of this because it's a lot more intimate. It's a lot easier than trying to DM someone on LinkedIn that's never going to see it. Because like, if people want to get in touch with me, I'm not going to respond on LinkedIn very well. Like, I try to, but really, if you want to get in touch with me, like, you need to text me or hit me on Slack. And so again, like, that's where those communities come in really big. I know another topic that's really interesting, I'd love to get your take on it, is the whole outbound is dead thing. Now you do a prospecting boot camp, so that's like your whole like business. Is outbound dead? Is it dying?
It's not dead. And I mean, people have been saying, is outbound dead? Is cold calling dead? Is this dead? Is that dead for a lot, actually quite a bit of time, like as far back as I can remember in my sales career. So it's not dead, because it's actually more important than ever, actually, because when times are tight right now, especially if you're in tech sales or tech adjacent sales or other industries that have been affected, like recruiting. And so when you're getting less inbound leads, and maybe when you don't have enough as much support from your BDR, if you're an account exec or something like that, then the onus is on you to build your own pipeline. And I don't know about you, but like when I've got a full pipe and I've got a lot of deals going on, like I'm showing up looser on calls and I'm showing up more relaxed. And now like I don't have so much pressure on every deal. But if I only have enough deals to like maybe get me to my number, then all of a sudden like I'm white knuckling it. And the best salespeople I know are like, they're not relying on anyone but themselves to be able to put themselves in a position to hit their numbers and hit their goals. So I think it's really important. What I'll say though is that the game is changing, and so like the things that we were doing 3 years ago are not necessarily working anymore. Like I still think cold emailing can work. Cold calling can work. Using LinkedIn can work. And also, like, it might benefit you as a seller to experiment with things that you haven't done before. And, we can get as in depth or not on that as you want to. But like, I know people that are booking a ton of meetings, sending videos. I know people that make a ton of meetings, putting together events for their prospects. I know a guy who's actually in the community who he'll send fake prosthetic arms and legs to people and say, hey, I bet your whatever provider is costing you an arm and a leg. We should set up a meeting on how I can cut your cost by 50%. And that sounds kind of cheesy, but he just closed the biggest deal in his company's history like a month or two ago. And so it's working for him. So my point being is that, I think there's still a place for getting in the routine of like making your calls every day, sending your emails, but creativity is what stands out in the AI world and in the world where execs get 200 emails a day. creativity, stepping outside the box, trying new things, experimenting, being more like a scientist in running experiments. I think that's the new age way to prospect.
What are some of your favorite things that you're seeing right now? Because I know I've heard some of your stories of how you've booked in the past using email and cold call. I mean, I still think those are differentiators because a lot of people don't want to pick up the phone call. You know, if you're looking for a way to be really different than other sellers, actually picking up the phone is a way to differentiate. But when you're talking about creativity and a lot of different tools that are out there, what are your favorite ones that you're seeing right now?
Wouldn't say that it's necessarily that in the tools, although there are some cool ones out there. So for me, I have a pretty small tech stack as a small business owner, and so like for me, you know, I'll tell you, like I use HubSpot as a CRM. I use Apollo for a lot of my prospecting, finding leads, using them in sequence, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, things like that. You know, I've heard some, or I've kind of checked out and used some tools like Clay for list building, for Bound for like, there's some AI cold calling, practicing and things like that people can do. But when I think of more innovative ways that I'm seeing is not even necessarily in the tech, although there is cool tech out there. I'm meaning like I know reps that will spend less time on the phones. And, you know, I've got a friend, for example, who lives in Chicago, he sells security hardware. And he started going to his prospects events, right? So he sells security. He went to the Des Moines, Iowa CISO happy hour, once a month for like 6 months in a row, right? He's the only salesperson there. There's like 100 CISOs talking about security stuff. And so he's not there to like pitch people, right? He's just there. He's learning. He's shaking some hands, getting to know some people. And people didn't really embrace him for a couple months. And then by like month 3 or 4, people start seeing that he's serious about this and like wants to learn and starts exchanging some business cards and meeting people. And then like after doing this for about 6 months, he's got like his 5 biggest deals all came from that event, from meeting people and then, you know, setting up meetings by like playing the long game. Now he's throwing a monthly happy hour in Chicago for security professionals, and he gets 40 to 60 people coming into this every month that are just like, they're walking into his funnel versus him having to like cold call and prospect and do things like that. So to me, I think there's always a place for using tech. I'm not anti that, but a lot of that is relying on what your company's willing to do for you. And so my question is like, what could sellers do outside of, you know, whatever company or whatever tools their company buys that can, you know, help engage some prospects in a new way outside of just the standard cold call?
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes back to what you said is selling is not the same way as it was 3 to 4 years ago. And it's just crazy that as a seller, I can't just go on autopilot and do the same things I was doing 3-4 years ago and hope that I'm smashing my number, because that's just not what's going to work. I think if you get a lot more creative and more high touch, because like a lot of those things you're mentioning, they're outbound motions, but they're making it feel less of an outbound because it's more intimate, right? If somebody shows up at my happy hour, like that's a much more intimate connection that I'm going to make with them than just getting a cold call or a cold email, which is like what used to happen when a few years ago. So with what you're doing at TA Sales, it sounds like you went all in on it about a year ago. You've got the prospecting boot camp, you have an online community, you have a couple different resources you're doing. I know that you're kind of like an all-in personality, Tom. I know that you have like big picture thinking and that you're highly ambitious. I'm really curious, when you look at the next 12 to 24 months of TA Sales, what's that look like for you?
Yeah, I think, you know, part of it's interesting because like part of running a business is like, man, I gotta get done what needs to get done today, and you're just like, you're looking at what's in front of you, and then it's also, all right, what could this look like a year from now or 2 years from now, and trying to have the vision. And it's just, that part is different than being in sales. Unless you're really like large enterprise seller, you're probably not thinking a year or two down the road in terms of your territory, maybe a quarter or two. And so it's just it's a different thing that I'm working on. For me, I'm going all in on the community. I think that's everything. I think to me, from all the conversations that I have with salespeople, like that is a huge problem. That's a huge gap. And so I'm really just getting started with what I want to do there. I've got a bunch of ideas. I think like pop-up events and like getting more local community, outside of just like the big retreat I might do once or twice a year, is really important. Like people having like an ongoing place to do that. I think linking up with some of the other great sellers and sales leaders that I know, to help contribute to that. Like I've got, people like Brian Lamana at Gong and Vin Mitano at Demand Base, and, some other great folks that are contributing, and getting those people involved is key. And then just adding more things, and just like the thing about a community is that it's all about who's in there. And the more great people are in there, it attracts other great people. And then the network effect just continues to compound and make it bigger and better. So it's like if there's two people in a room, that's cool, but there's only so much that those two people can talk about. But if you get now 9 people and 20 people and 100 people that all have the same quality bar and are all there for the right reasons, it just becomes more and more powerful for everyone when they're looking for a new job, when they're looking to hire, when they're going through a certain challenge. I think it's just about the quantity and the quality of people. So for me, like, I'm just really obsessed with that idea and trying to make it, trying to build the quality of the community, and know that the rest will kind of follow out after that.
And is this on like Patreon? Is it on School? Where is it?
It is not. I'm considering, or I'm looking into School now that Hermosi's like going so hard. He's got me curious. But right now we host things on it's a Slack channel. There's the calls are on Zoom, and then I've got a library. It's a platform called Disco where all the content, like on demand content, is held.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm really curious about the School thing, because I've seen Hormozy talking about it and how like they're able to grow really fast over there. I'm curious what it would be like for you guys. That's awesome. Okay, Tom, last question for people listening. If you only had $1,000 and you wanted to start a business right now, what would you start?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. I'll say 2 things. I actually thought about this while I was walking this morning, because I wanted to give you like a cool answer. Well, one thing I'll say is that I did start this with under $1,000. I didn't, in order to land my first customer, it didn't really require much upfront cost at all, right? Other than like, I guess, the cost of time that I spent putting into the content, which really wasn't a lot of money. But if I was starting with under $1,000, I would do a service business. So I would say, I would ask myself, if I were a listener, I would say, what is something that people ask me about? They ask for my advice on, and how could I potentially help people with that and charge money for it? So I'll give like a couple examples. For me, obviously that was like sales coaching and training. I did it for free, one-on-one with people for a while, just to like build up my street cred before I ever charged for it. I was out to dinner with a friend last weekend, and she was talking about doing some free coaching for people that were women that were dating in her city, and wanting to give them like dating advice, because it could be brutal for people to be dating in a big city. I know a buddy that has put together like events, for like guys going on an event to like go golfing or whatever, and like help put those together. And it's like, hey, I'll do it, and give me like a little bit of a bump, give me like a 10% or, something like something nominal for that. So I feel like everyone has that thing or two that people come to them and ask them about. And it doesn't have to be about what your job is. It could be about what one of your hobbies are, or just something that you like to do. And I would first start doing it for free. I would help 5 to 10 people out for free. I'd ask them for referrals. And then at some point I would just make an ask, and I would just ask for a pretty low dollar amount, get started, and then just like let it snowball, get happy customers. They'll tell other people. Then you can start charging more. Then it can just keep growing and growing from there. I think that's like, to me, that's the world I understand. I'm not like a product person, so it's hard for me to give advice on that. But I think there's a lot of beauty to like how quick you could get off the ground with a service business. Like you could probably do it just today, and find a customer.
For sure. Well, and I think it's the importance of being able to find your first customer is so huge, because I was at an event last week. Actually, I was at the SaaS Stock event down in Austin, and
Nice.
I overheard one of the speakers who talked about how there's a lot of people right now who can raise a lot of money, or sorry, they used to be able to raise a lot of money, but they were never good at sales. And now that skill is more important than ever, because like, it doesn't matter if you have a cool product or if you have a cool thought or a cool idea, if you can't sell it, because you have to have that market validation. You have to be able to prove, hey, like, people seem to come to me for this one thing and I always solve it. What if I could charge $1 for every time I answered that one question? Or what if I could create like a small service business around that? And so, yeah, I love that idea, because I mean, like you said, you're able to start your business for less than $1,000 because you already had the market and the audience, which is the huge value of having a LinkedIn audience or some social, your podcast audience, is that you're doing all the advertising. Like, you are free advertising, and you're advertising your own services, which is incredible.
Yeah, can I just add one more thing on that
go for it.
people that are listening, is that there's a great book called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, and Naval, he's semi-internet famous, so people might have heard of him, but he created AngelList and a bunch of other companies, really smart entrepreneur. And in it, he says, if you can do two things, or even one of two things, you could be unstoppable as an entrepreneur, and that's to build something and to sell something. And in his mind, or in his kind of theory, the best way that, like, the one thing that you can do is to create a business around like what you are uniquely the best in the world at, and you just keep digging in until it's that thing, you know? And so, like, that's where I'm not quite there. I'm like getting closer and closer to that as like we're talking about the community stuff. I really feel like a deep alignment to that, like internally. But that's why you see people like, you know, I mean, Joe Rogan is like an obvious example, or like any like really big like internet person, is because they're just themselves and they get paid a lot of money to do things that they're interested in, because no one is better at having that type of podcast than he is, or no one's better at having, you know, like whatever it is, you know, type of conversation than, you know, people that have their own specific niche. So that would be like the question that I would be asking myself if I was listening to this and like, man, I want to do something, but I don't know what it is. I'd pick up that book and I just figure out like, what is my thing? Like, what do people keep asking me about? And maybe it's like 2 or 3 things mixed together. And like, that's your formula. And I would just keep playing with that until you could figure something out.
No, I love that a lot. And I think, I mean, you even think of Justin Welsh. He's another pretty obvious internet example. He just talks about one thing, but he's really good at it. And I think a lot of it comes down to action too, right? Like, you started your podcast and you said it was just on like self-help to begin with, but then it ended up turning into more of a sales specific. And now it's about sales community and prospecting. And it's like a very niched down thing. But the only reason that you've been able to niche down so much and have such a strong target audience is because you started so broad. Like, you started and you just acted and acted. And now you're like over 300 episodes in. And so I think that like finding something you're good at is really important, but also just like putting in the reps and like talking to a lot of people. I don't know if you listen to Brian Lubin. He's honestly like, he's got like a really hot podcast right now, and I'm a huge fan of it. But he talks a lot about that as well. Just like taking the action. Like, that's how he launched his first course, was he interviewed like 100 people for free. He's like, hey, on his podcast, he said, hey, I'm going to interview a ton of people for free. I'll give you a free 15-minute coaching call. And then he went back to that same 100 people afterwards and said, hey, I'm going to build a course around what our coaching call was on. Would you be interested? And he had a super high conversion rate. And it was because he was able to find the same problem that they had, which is similar to what you've done, is he saw all these people come to him and say that they had this problem. And then he converted it into a course and was able to make money off of it. And then he's like now converted that into an online community where they can get those resources for free and now implement them as a part of a community, which I think the community aspect just like helps with accountability and like making sure people are following through on things.
That's so smart.
But Tom, this has been so fun. I love the energy that you have here. But thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time, and I had a blast.